U.S. President Donald Trump delivered a rare evening address to the American public and addressed affordability issues, boasting that prices had fallen under his tenure. He also insisted that his tariffs are working and that they will deliver more benefits soon. The U.S. Senate approved the annual defense policy bill for the next fiscal year, which includes a key provision that bars the use of defense funds to reduce U.S. troops in South Korea below the current level. National Security Advisor Ri Sung-rak is in Washington for talks with U.S. officials on the recently unveiled joint fact sheet, outlining key details of trade and security agreements between the two countries. The two sides are expected to have discussed civil uranium enrichment and the reprocessing of spent fuel. Hello and thanks for joining us on Arirang News. We begin today in the United States, where President Donald Trump delivered a national address just minutes ago as the anniversary of his return to office approaches and as his approval ratings have been sinking recently amid economic concerns and persistent cost of living pressures. For more on this, we have our correspondent Park Ko-nu on the line for us. Ko-nu, what were some of the key takeaways from his speech?
Right, Inji. So one of the biggest keywords for today's speech was mostly related to the economy side. So Trump gave his roughly 20-minute national address from the White House beginning at 9 p.m. local time. And he opened his speech by criticizing former President Joe Biden while praising what he called the achievements of his own administration, the common format Trump uses when speaking publicly.
11 months ago, I inherited a mess, and I'm fixing it. When I took office, inflation was the worst in 48 years, and some would say in the history of our country, which caused prices to be higher than ever before, making life unaffordable for millions and millions of Americans.
Trump claimed that prices are now falling and he is bringing them down very fast, specifically citing the cost of a Thanksgiving turkey that was 33% cheaper this year compared to 2024. He continued attacking Democrats, accusing them of having looted the Treasury. And he added that wages are rising much faster than inflation, calling it a positive development. Trump also claimed he had secured $18 trillion in investment into the U.S., crediting his tariff policies. The president also announced what he called a warrior dividend, promising 1,776 U.S. dollar checks to U.S. service members before Christmas. He also highlighted a crackdown on illegal immigration as a key achievement in the first year of his second term.
Right, and how are Trump's latest approval ratings looking?
So recent polls show Trump's approval ratings are declining. A new Reuters and Ipsos poll released on Tuesday showed that just 33% of U.S. adults approve of how Trump's handling the economy. In a separate poll conducted by PBS News, NPR, and Marist, Trump recorded his lowest ever approval ratings for economic policies ever, including during his first term. Only 36% of Americans said they approve, with many citing concerns over the cost of living. And that contrasts with when Trump returned to office, when he pledged to tackle high prices following post-COVID inflation. The issue is likely to factor into next year's midterm elections, which are widely seen as a measure of public sentiment toward the Trump administration. And that's all I have for you now at this hour. Back to you, Ng.
All right, Ko-nu, thank you for the wrap-up. Do keep us updated. Continuing in the U.S., the Senate approved next year's defense budget bill. The bill includes provisions that restrict the Trump administration from unilaterally reducing the size of U.S. forces Korea below the current level of 28,500. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
The U.S. Senate on Wednesday passed the 2026 Fiscal Year National Defense Authorization Act, approving a defense budget of $901 billion, about $8 billion more than requested by the administration. The bill passed 77-20 and will take effect after President Donald Trump signs it. A key provision bars the use of defense funds to reduce U.S. troops in South Korea below the current level of 28,500 and reaffirms the U.S. nuclear umbrella commitment to Seoul. The funding restriction, which had been absent during the Biden administration, returns under Trump's second term. Analysts say it reflects congressional efforts to prevent potential troop reductions as the administration pushes for greater burden sharing among allies. The bill also restricts funding for the transfer of wartime operational control from the U.S. South Korea Combined Forces Command to a South Korea-led command to prevent the transfer process from deviating from the agreed framework. The restriction can be lifted after 60 days if the defense secretary certifies the transfer aligns with U.S. national security interests and has been coordinated with allies. The Lee Jae-myung government aims to complete the transfer during its term, and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has voiced support. The NDAA will cover the U.S. defense budget from October through next September. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
National Security Advisor Ri Sung-nak has met U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright for apparent follow-up talks to the allies' joint fact sheet. Now, their meeting on Wednesday in Washington would have included issues tied to South Korea's civil uranium enrichment and the reprocessing of spent fuel. The leaders of the two countries have earlier agreed upon Seoul building nuclear-powered submarines. The current bilateral nuclear energy pact bans South Korea from using nuclear material for military purposes. We earlier mentioned the case of Australia being granted an exception in acquiring nuclear-powered submarines through the AUKUS Defense Partnership. Pressure is mounting on e-commerce giant Coupang following one of the country's largest personal data breaches. Lawmakers are now demanding answers and accountability from the company's leadership. Our Bunyeran has more.
South Korea's National Assembly opened a hearing on Wednesday into the massive data breach at e-commerce giant Coupang, which exposed the personal information of millions of users. Lawmakers from the Science, ICT, Broadcasting and Communications Committee questioned newly appointed executives in the absence of founder and chairman Kim Bum-seok and former CEO Park Dae-jun, drawing criticism that senior decision-makers were again avoiding direct accountability. Questions focused on how the breach occurred, the company's data security practices, internal oversight, and who should ultimately bear responsibility. Harold Rogers, the new CEO of US-based Coupang Inc., apologized to Korean customers and addressed criticism over the company's limited response.
The investigation is ongoing. We're working daily, around the clock, with multiple regulators here in Korea. As we learn and confirm the facts, we will be rolling out a responsible compensation plan for our customers.
So far, Coupang has limited its response to basic prevention guidelines and simplified account deletion. Rogers also faced pointed questions over Coupang's revenue structure and criticism that its top leadership was avoiding accountability.
In 2024, Coupang's revenue amounted to 41.29 trillion Korean won, and 90% of that came from South Korea, 36.4 trillion won, 90%. Does it make any sense for witness Kim Bum-seok to not be here while talking about being a global company?
Ahead of the hearing, Kim submitted a written explanation citing overseas residence and global business commitments, while Park resigned just a week earlier. The Assembly's National Policy Committee has since decided to file an official charge against Kim for failing to appear without justifiable reason and pass legislation allowing fines of up to 10% of total revenue for serious data breaches. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
On the economic front, consumer price increases in South Korea have been rebounding for the past couple months at 2.4% on year, with the projection for next year at 2.1%. Now, all this as the Korean won continues to weaken further against US dollar, a primary concern for the nation's economy. Our Kim Do-yeon reports.
The Bank of Korea projects consumer prices to increase by 2.1% next year, but highlighted a recent rebound in prices due to exchange rate volatility. Governor Lee Chang-yong stated on Wednesday during an inflation briefing that if the exchange rate continues at its current high level, inflation is likely to rise higher than the current forecast.
Several factors are compounding to drive up recent consumer inflation. Unlike previous years, unfavorable weather has kept agricultural and fishery prices high, while the rising exchange rate has kept oil prices strong.
Taking a closer look at this year's inflation trend, consumer price inflation started the year hovering above the 2% range. Inflation slowed by the summer, hitting a yearly low of 1.7% in August due to temporary factors. However, inflation started creeping up again in the fourth quarter, with prices in both October and November 2.4% higher than the year before. Despite this recent volatility, the central bank is maintaining its baseline forecast for next year at 2.1%. The BOK expects stability because the current economic recovery is led by the IT sector, which tends to have a limited immediate impact on general consumer prices. However, the exchange rate remains a critical variable. The bank's analysis shows that if the $1 rate persists around the 1,471 level, inflation could exceed its forecast and rise to the mid-2% range. Governor Lee also took the opportunity to address the weakness of the Korean won in detail. He clarified that the current situation is not a financial crisis in the traditional sense where banks fail or the nation faces default. However, he admitted that the continued weakness of the won is deeply concerning due to its social impact.
I completely disagree that this is a traditional financial crisis, but in other respects, I would call it a crisis, and I am deeply worried. The current exchange rate has a significant impact on inflation. Furthermore, when rates rise like this, the divide between those who benefit and those who lose becomes extreme.
Governor Lee emphasized that considering this potential for growth polarization, the current exchange rate level is far from reassuring and requires vigilance to prevent social discord. 김도희, Arirang News.
South Korea saw a record number of people taking parental leave last year, thanks partly to the recent rise in the birth rate. And it wasn't just moms looking after their children, so were a record number of dads. Our Park Jun-an reports.
South Korea saw a record number of parental leave takers in 2024, surpassing 206,000 for the first time since such data was first recorded in 2010. According to data released by the Ministry of Data and Statistics on Wednesday, the total number of people taking parental leave reached just over 26,000, up 4% from 2023. This rebound follows a slight dip in 2023 amid low birth rates and coincides with a modest increase in the fertility rate from 0.72 to 0.75, the first rise in 9 years. And a notable shift is emerging toward shared parenting. The number of fathers taking parental leave surged 18.3% to over 60,000 fathers, accounting for more than 29% of the total, the highest proportion ever. For the first time, more than 10% of fathers of newborns took parental leave, meaning roughly 1 in 10 eligible fathers of 2024 newborns used leave in the year their child was born. Overall, parental leave usage for newborns last year hit a record 34.7%. However, over 60% of parental leave takers work at large companies with over 300 employees, where usage rates are higher. In small firms with fewer than 5 workers, only 41% of eligible mothers took leave, raising questions about why parents at smaller businesses often make less use of parental leave.
Small businesses are already short-staffed and often cannot find replacement workers. When employees take extended leave, employers still bear wage costs, adding financial pressure. While parental leave supports child-rearing, it also widens the gap between workplaces, and this issue deserves serious discussion.
The general trend of more fathers taking parental leave reflects the government's efforts to combat low birth rates by encouraging paternal involvement in childcare, marking progress toward more balanced family responsibilities. Park Jun-an, Arirang News.
A Los Angeles court on Wednesday heard the first appearance of Nick Reiner, charged with murdering his parents, actor-director Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle Singer Reiner. The 32-year-old wearing a suicide prevention jacket did not enter a plea. The judge postponed his arraignment until January 7th at his attorney's request, holding him without bail. Prosecutors charged Reiner with 2 counts of first-degree murder and added special circumstances of multiple murders and an allegation he used a knife. Rob Reiner and his wife were found dead from apparent stab wounds in their Los Angeles home, and police arrested Nick Reiner hours later nearby. In a statement, his siblings Jake and Romy said they are in, quote, unimaginable pain and asked for privacy and restraint. The UK government on Wednesday gave Roman Abramovich 90 days to transfer $3.3 billion from the sale of Chelsea Football Club to Ukrainian war victims or face court action. The funds remain frozen under UK sanctions. London says Abramovich agreed in 2022 to donate the money to Ukraine and warned that it won't allow these funds to sit unused while victims suffer. Researchers tracking wild polar bears in northern Canada have captured rare footage of a mother bear adopting a cub that is not her own. Scientists observed the 5-year-old bear during the annual migration along western Hudson Bay near Churchill, Manitoba, with 2 cubs, including one without a tag. Researchers say it's only the 13th known adoption case out of 4,600 bears studied over nearly 5 decades in the area. The cubs appear healthy and are expected to stay with the mother until they are about 2.5 years old. 주지현, 아리랑 뉴스.
We had a quick taste of winter this morning with temperatures briefly dipping below freezing. But highs will rise similar to yesterday under bright skies this afternoon. And you know, with the milder than average temperatures we've had this winter so far, it doesn't really feel like the end of the year here in Korea. Overnight cold wind blew away the dust in the air, so we are expecting much improved air quality nationwide. Highs in Seoul will be getting up to 7 degrees, Daegu, Gwangju both topping out at 11 degrees. And many of the southern provinces will notice temperature swings of more than 15 degrees between the morning and the afternoon. Make sure to layer up. Temperatures stay on the much warmer side through Saturday, then rain on the same day will bring down the temperatures on Sunday. Things will turn colder, but not to a freezing level through the end of the year.
Now that's all we have for today's noon edition of Arirang News. Thank you for watching. We'll be back at 5 p.m. Korea time. Stay tuned.